Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Welcome to r/LetsNotMeet, a place where you can find some of the scariest but true stories found on the internet. And this first one, by user/picture_this_Sicily, is exceptional, so let's get straight into it. I came over from Siberia at age 13 with my mother. My older brother, who was 15 years older than me, had lived in America for a few years and he sent out for us. My mum wouldn't be staying, although at the time I wasn't aware of that. Anyway, we landed in New York City and the plan was my brother would come get us. However, my niece decided to come early and my brother's wife went into labor shortly before we landed. My brother couldn't leave his wife, so he asked a co-worker of his, they drove cabs, to pick us up in New York City and drive us to New Jersey, where him and my sister-in-law lived. When we got to New York City, we waited in customs for what seemed like forever. We looked for my brother, but didn't see him. This was the early 90s, and cell phones weren't as commonplace, and even if they were, my mum and I didn't have one. We panicked a bit not seeing my brother or sister-in-law. Suddenly, we heard our names being called and saw a tall man. He introduced himself in perfect Serbian and explained he was a good friend of my brother's, and then told us about the baby. He said he'd be driving us the 2 hours from the airport to my brother's home. My mom relaxed and they happily began to converse about the baby and my brother and America. I, however, just felt off. This guy gave me bad vibes, and regardless of my brother's friendship with him, I felt distrustful of him. We drove for a good hour and a half when he announced he was going to take us for breakfast. We hadn't eaten in over 15 hours, so we were starving by then. We pulled up to a house and my mum and I were confused. He insisted cheerfully that his wife was cooking us breakfast, and after we'd drive the rest of the way to the hospital to see my family. My mum shushed me when I whispered something didn't feel right, and told me we needed to be grateful for the hospitality. We were led up into the house. It was dark and dank and dirty. Suddenly, I think my mum finally got a bit nervous and started insisting he take us to my brother. Suddenly, the guy grabbed my mum by the wrist. He told her that he needed a wife to take care of him and his house. And when he heard my brother tell the others at work she'd be coming to stay, he knew he'd found a wife. I at the time was a scrawny little scamp of a kid, and I tried pushing him off my mum, but he hit me so hard I saw stars. At this point, we're terrified. Neither of us spoke English. We only knew my brother's home phone number, and he was at the hospital. Also, in Serbia, you don't dial 911, so even if I could, I didn't know that's how I'd call the police. Anyway, he tells my mum she's to clean and cook for him, and he takes me to the basement, where I was locked in what I now is called the laundry room. I banged and cried and yelled, but it was so far down in the basement, everything was muffled. For a week, we were kept in his home. He'd lock us up in the basement after my mum cooked him breakfast, and he'd let us out when he'd come home at 4. If we had to use the restroom, there was a bathroom, but that was it. Just a bathroom and laundry room. It was freezing cold down there, and even us huddling together under a blanket did nothing. One morning, I discovered a small window by climbing on some boxes. I managed to open it, and my mother insisted I squeeze through it. I didn't want to leave her, and besides, how would I get help? I couldn't read nor speak the language. However, I didn't want to live like this for the rest of my life, so I did as she asked. I ran once I got out, and I'm sure I was a sight. A scrawny boy with no shoes, only wearing shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of November. However, that is what saved us, as several concerned neighbors tried to get me to come to them, and I wouldn't. I was terrified. I kept trying to get them to follow me. The police were called, and a very nice policeman tried to get me to go into his car. Then I saw the man who'd taken us drive up in his taxi. He saw the cops and took off. That's when I made a run for his house to get my mum. Needless to say, the cop and his partner ran after me, and my mother was rescued. It took another 4 hours for them to find someone who spoke our language for us to tell them what happened. A warrant was issued for a man. My brother was contacted. His friend had told him we never showed up, and my brother had been frantically calling back home in Serbia to find us. He drove up to get us and to give the cops information on his supposed friend so they could find him. They never did find him. Back then, before 9/11, it was easy for someone to disappear. However, it made me distrustful for a long time of people and their intentions. My mum grew homesick and she ended up going back to Serbia. I stayed and finished school. I ended up becoming a cop in the military thanks to the nice officer that helped me all those years ago. I think of that guy who kept us prisoner every now and then, and honestly, I wouldn't mind meeting him now. I just don't think he'd want to meet me. And here's our next post by user/FearNotMonkey. Okay, so around 9 or 10 years ago, I was living with my mum, dad, and older sister in an oldish house in a very small village. Like, when I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church and a few scattered houses occupied mostly by very old people. At the time, it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything, and since we were so far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was I'd wake up around 10 or 11. By this point, mum, dad, and sister had all left for work, so I had the house to myself. I'd go downstairs, make some toast, watch some random stuff on TV for an hour before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy, cut off from the world by many, many fields. I should give a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing and could go either left to my room or immediate right, my sister's room. Basically, the way this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that the ceilings in both our bedrooms were slanted. We were basically in a large attic with the roof slanted down. Because of where the slant met the wall, we had crawl space that ran the length of the house on either side of the rooms, both with a small door to access them. These were mostly used for storing normal attic stuff like Christmas decorations and old forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side along my room. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time you were in there, you were crawling on hands and knees. This is all important, I promise. Anyway, this one morning, I'm awoken to a familiar noise, some sort of small creature rustling around in the crawl space of my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it. Not an unusual noise. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly, and they pretty much had the run of the storage spaces, no matter how many traps were put down. I thought nothing of it and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and television. The first odd thing I noticed was while watching TV, I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she'd just not gone to work that day for whatever reason and continued munching. Around an hour or 2 later, I went back upstairs and booted my PC. As I was waiting, I turned around to open my door and faced my sister's closed one, and realized it was late in the day and she had yet to leave her room. An odd thing, since she's normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. We're not the most active family. I started to think that maybe she was at work and I'd imagined the noise from upstairs. But as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door as a shadow passed by it. Okay, so there's definitely someone in there, so it must be her, right? I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small TV in her room and no books, so what had she been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and again saw a shadow under the door. She was still moving around in there, so what was up? I finally decided to go knock on her door. I knocked a few times and said her name. No answer. Weird, but maybe she had headphones or something on? I knocked a bit harder again and said her name again, but louder. No answer. Alright, I thought, F this. I'm just going to go in, so I cracked the door open and peered round. I found an empty room. No one inside at all. Feeling slightly confused but better that it was just my imagination, I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full-on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading to the crawl space, there was a small hole that mice had made to get in and out at the bottom. Really small. but just big enough to fit half your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers, holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers, don't be stupid. Until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole, into the crawl space. I lost my very quietly, though I might add. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to my room. Being the stupid teenager I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon I could find. The fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years previous. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mum, who worked about a 5-minute drive from our house. She told me to stay put and that her and her manager were on their way. In this time, I made a small upgrade from the fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs. I felt much better with that. Finally, my mum and her boss John turn up, and I tell them everything leading back up to this point. They say, okay, and we all set off upstairs to investigate. Me, rather unheroically, bringing up the rear with my golf club. We get into my sister's room, and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mum is just hard as nails or massively stupid. But while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open, and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right, and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the psycho murderer hiding in there. Before she shouts, "Chris, what the F are you doing in there? Get out!" Small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. Unbeknownst to me, the night before, my dad had asked Chris to leave as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said, yep, that's cool, and as far as mum and dad knew, he'd headed home. What really happened was instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he'd left, then he could stay another night. He then would wake up before my dad shouted my sister up for work like she did every morning, and would hide in the crawl space and sleep there until everyone had left for the day. For one small hitch in the plan that they didn't think of was, you guessed it, me. They'd forgotten I was home and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day. So he was trapped. When I knocked, he hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked out. Anyway, my mum swiftly told him to get the F out and not come back. Sadly, this wasn't the last time we saw the guy, as it turned out he'd stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he'd been hiding out. And then, because my sister makes terrible decisions, got her pregnant and proceeded to smash windows, trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while, we lived in the same city when I went to uni, and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. Super guy. Oh, and a small topper to all this. As I mentioned earlier, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He'd been in there for close to 14 hours, with no access to a toilet. But no worry for this guy, because he had lots of empty bottles to pee in, which he kindly left behind for us to clean up. And finally, around a year later, as mum was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were at the far back of the storage space, she found a small bag filled with feces. I should mention where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day, it was him, hiding his poop amongst our tinsel and tree. So, sister's baby daddy, who hid in our crawl space and used it as a private bathroom. Let's not meet, yeah? Alright, this story went from genuinely terrifying to probably one of the funniest things I've read in a while in a mere matter of seconds. But with that said, I think I'm gonna leave it there for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel for Reddit videos 3 times every single week. But with that said, that is it from me. I hope you all enjoyed, and all I want to do is see you all here next time. See you later, guys.